Brics is a failed organization. It's basically China's hegemonic school club, but now it's breaking down. Changed my mind. Welcome to China Insider. I'm Zhang. Before we get started, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and make sure to like and comment below what your thoughts are. Especially try to convince me that Brics is still a real thing. All right, so 6 countries will be joining the Brics in 2024. And that's Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Now, this was announced at the Brics summit in South Africa this week. If anything, these countries only make the Brics look like a Frankenstein organization to just get money from China, rather than a real economic co-op.
On my way to give you some money and take your girl. Here comes the money. I'm here to give you some money and take
Wait,
your girl.
I'm the translator. No,
you can't come in. Where's my translator? I'm on my way to give out some money. Money. You get some money. You get some money. You get some money. And where's my translator? Money, giving out some money.
Of course, China did just agree to give $10 billion to a special fund in the Brics, and that just proves my point, that the CCP is treating this thing like it's just another Belt and Road Initiative or a UN-like organization, just throwing money around to buy influence. Now, China is using the Brics as the base for its challenge against the West, essentially creating the alternative version or the developing nations version of the G7. And China should arguably have its developing nation status removed, since they're able to launch trade wars and is also the #2 economy in the world. But because of their horrible economy right now, staying as a developing nation seems to be the only or the last-ditch effort, only effort maybe, to rescue their market, which won't work out because manufacturing is not coming back to China. Now, the bigger problem is that everyone can see the intention of China using the Brics as the alternative or to challenge the West. And now it's even more apparent. Prior to the South Africa summit this week, the CCP's binding to Russia and its allies with Iran was already clear. Now, adding in members like Syria, North Korea, and Pakistan, you have the basic geopolitical force centering around China. Of the 6 new countries joining, by allowing countries like Iran into the Brics, China is one step closer to pulling all of its geopolitical allies into a so-called economic organization. All they need is just North Korea to come in and apparently develop its economy to form a new axis of evil militaries trying to do business. Well, the Brics is no longer going to be seen as a group of emerging powers because it now includes an internally torn Ethiopia, which lacks both geopolitical and economic weight. Argentina is also going to be in this too, and it's literally on the verge of bankruptcy. Its inflation is past 100%. At Johannesburg this week, Brics was expanded without essentially any objective criteria. Nearly half of the 6 members, they're petrostates, right? Like Saudi and the UAE. Well, that basically tells us that the Brics has lost its original meaning or idea, right? The one that was proposed by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill, which is to describe fast-growing economies that would collectively dominate the global economy by 2050. But now it's losing its flavor. Brics comes from an era where China was hiding behind the mask of peace, and it was doing the reform and opening up era. But now it is going into the Mao Zedong era again. So after almost 2 decades, the original economic-driven focus of Brics is gone. Now China's clear objectives are geopolitical. They're around Asia, they're around taking Taiwan, and they are incorporating fellow members who have a clear geopolitical objective too. Right? But consider this, both China and India are in this for the economic part, but they're also rivals in the geopolitical space. Could that derail the economic part? Well, not to mention the elephant in the room is that Brics is supposedly going to help countries grow. But China right now is facing the worst economic turn in 40 years. Isn't that ironic? No wonder Xi Jinping missed the business forum during the Brics summit, because maybe he was too scared to show up to talk about the economy. What the Brics has become is a playground for the CCP's export of authoritarianism. And in most cases, it's to fool the people in the West to believe that the Brics will somehow unseat the G7. Now, sure, the BRICS will create a currency or rely on the yuan as the common denomination for trade, but that is not useful at all when you still have to deal with other countries who use the dollar. Now, sure, Saudi Arabia could use the yuan to trade with China when it comes to the oil, but outside of that, the yuan is still worthless. Given how bad the Chinese economy is right now, guessing who is running to the United States for export cooperation? China is. Also, the yuan is just a horrible thing to have right now. It's practically worthless. It has never had any values because of its mandatory adjustments by the Central Bank of China. But outside of that, right now, its exchange rate dipped below 7.3. And that's a bottom line for the regime. Now, partly because China is in deflation, they try to cut rates, right? Interest rate to boost spending, but it failed. It backfired. So the yuan is in a downfall slide, and it's already one of Asia's weakest dollar pairs, which is down 6% year to date. Now, the lowest interest rate when a deflationary spiral is now feeding is a lower consumption loop, and that continues to bring more trouble. The yuan, of course, is being defended by the Central Bank of China from falling further, but that's all a manual adjustments so that it doesn't just go into free fall. Because once it hits that 8 exchange rate, so $1 to 8 yuan, economists say that's going to go into like 10, 20, 30, and it's going to be disastrous. And so it is not a currency that's somehow going to defeat the US dollar. And they actually have been saying this since at least 2010. Quote, in order to facilitate trade and investment, we will study the feasibilities of monetary cooperation, including local currency trade settlement arrangement between our countries. In other words, they could come up with a common currency policy. But it just hasn't happened yet. Why? Because nobody trusts the yuan, everybody trusts the dollar, and it's not going to change anytime soon. If anything, using yuan in the BRICS is like passing around poker chips. It's a token that has no value outside of these countries. And once everybody's not growing, you'd imagine all that trade is going to be pretty small or insignificant. But will they completely decouple from the Western market? It's impossible. Eventually, they will all have to still transfer all that trade with China. If they want to really truly use it to buy stuff from other countries, especially first world countries, then they have to use the US dollar still. So in the end, it achieves nothing. And I seriously question how long India could stay in the BRICS, given now the differences geopolitically with China, and we have many states going to join the BRICS that are nations around Central Asia, into the Middle East and Africa, where India's opponents are situated. And India is a democracy in a unique position where they have many threats facing them. Also, by inviting the big competitors in the Middle East, Iran and Saudi Arabia, you had the UAE into the group, BRICS has actually bet on a very fragile process of detente in the region, which actually could always turn into open hostility anytime soon, right? Everything is built on interest, and when interests stop aligning or China stops giving them money, well, it just breaks easily. Now, the expansion of the BRICS is moving the goalpost essentially into all directions at the same time. They're stretching it so far in north, south, west, and east that it doesn't seem to make sense anymore. Now, would the Saudis and the UAE sit around and just let China and India be the boss? Of course not. Not when it considers that they have oil interest or trade interest. They're also smart enough to not, dish out $10 billion like China does every time. And what does Iran even provide? Terrorism? These just don't make sense, right? I mean, why aren't Asian countries lining up to join the BRICS? It's because they see the club as an instrument of China's hegemonic aspirations, right? They know that this is what China wants to do because they're so close to China. Whereas, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East countries, they don't really necessarily care about China's doings or its ambitions in Asia. What they're thinking more about is the economic opportunities that they can get while they still can with China. And so, of course, it also comes with the bargaining positions and potentially an exposure to a better international relationship, especially when it comes to trying to win over the US with another trade relationship. And so this is all a part of a bigger scheme than what we're being told. And I just don't feel like there's a major responsibility for countries that are joining the BRICS nations in terms of protecting the global order, peace across the region in Asia, as well as just the overall defense against authoritarianism. A lot of these countries don't have that task, right? So don't see BRICS as this alternative world to that of the West-led global order. It doesn't have the power to unseat anything. It's simply a choo-choo train that China is driving at the front, in basically carrying everybody into a cliff. And BRICS, it looks like it's cost-free and it's opportunity-enhancing, but you're not really in this for more than just a potential exposure to opportunities. And in reality, there's not a lot to be made, especially given how bad China's economy is right now. But David, aren't nations of the BRICS now accounting for a third of the world's population? I mean, its GDP has surpassed that of the West. And if they all work together, they could topple, the US economy. Sure, that is true on paper by the numbers, and in principle, in theory, it technically could, but that's it. It's just on paper. If BRICS tried to be a challenger to the US, they openly decide, right? You would immediately see countries like India leave the organization because India's interests align more with the US now. And that's much bigger than what China could project. And it would essentially kill the attempt. And that's, half of the GDP from BRICS gone. In fact, if China stopped giving money to this organization, they would all immediately probably leave. You really have to examine the situation of BRICS. The only country that seems to be doing so well is India, of the original 5 members at least. The new members like UAE and Saudi, they were already petrol giants before joining. It's not like they're making money from BRICS. And Russia is essentially drained from the war in Ukraine. And Brazil's economy is also on decline. And South Africa's economy is also facing multiple troubles. China is the worst of it all. It's facing the worst crisis in the real estate sector, super high unemployment, low consumerism, deflation, recession. All these troubles, it doesn't sound like the BRICS did any wonders for China or anybody else. And for India especially, it's their own cooperation with other countries and its own growth that has led to today. It's not BRICS. And so my conclusion with all this in the end is that BRICS is just all fluff and no substance. And it's just all a ploy from China to try to win some propaganda points, and that's it. All right, if you enjoyed my analysis or if you have something to say, let me know in the comments, and also like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. As always, this is China Insider. I'm David Zhang. We'll see you next time.